What's up, people? You know that sound? The Unfiltered band means, yes, another episode of Unfiltered. Coming your way here and now. This officially go down as episode 182. We're kind of like a 181 part 2. As we talk a little bit about the Cardinal way, and I wanted to get into this situation with Wilson Contreras and go deeper, and our thanks in 181 if you missed it. Didn't listen to it or watch it, you can get it at Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts, or on YouTube. Mark Feinstein, MLB.com, MLB Network, joining me to discuss this, among other topics, including Ohtani, the Rays' success, the Mets' lack thereof, the pitch clock, which has been very successful, among other things. We attempt to be successful with the help of our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline, your number one source for all your basketball info, stats, news, and scores. Latest odds and lines and the latest matchup reports for this year's NBA playoffs. BetOnline, your sports intel headquarters this season. They got you covered for all your insider sports wagering needs, from basketball, MLB, NHL, hockey, golf, UFC, even boxing. It's the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. It includes live betting options and your favorite casino and card games, available to play right now, right from your home. Get into the action today. Head over to the website or use your mobile device to join, and be sure to use our promo code. It's BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. Receive your 50% bonus on your first deposit. It's BetOnline, where the game starts as we get started right here. And again, specifically talking here in this little shortened ditty about the Cardinal way and this wayward scenario with Wilson Contreras. Start here. I discussed this a little bit with Mark Feinstein, but I want to delve deeper. Covering baseball for many years, both seeing it from afar and on the grand scope nationally, being in St. Louis many times, many postseasons, seeing them in separate World Series, being there for the David Freese game and just, a few feet from the field, getting ready to go on it to do interviews, watching all of that take place with my very eyes in what was the loudest baseball stadium I've experienced as a fan or working. Seen plenty about the Cardinal way. And we like to talk a lot of crap about the Cardinal way because of how much we hear about the Cardinal way. And I think part of it is people thinking, well, what does it mean? Other organizations aren't professional? Does it mean that other organizations don't know what they're doing? Does it mean other organizations don't do it the right way because the Cardinal way is supposed to be the right way? Well, you know what? The Cardinal way, to me, the way I saw it, even though it might have been way overboard, was about being professional, about representing that logo in that city, about doing things the right way, about handling yourself with class, about leadership, and so many different names that have been in and out of there, from the most recently, the Yadier Molinas, Albert Pujols, not once but twice, the Matt Hollidays and the Waynos and Chris Carpenters and so many others. And representation of baseball the way you would want it to be. And whether the fans or the players both have touted more than they at times have, and whether it's driven people crazy, and it certainly has, or not, there's a legitimizing of it that comes from what's on the back of the baseball card for that franchise, both in the successes that they have had on the field, the lack of issues many times off of it, and what they represented to us, whether you like the Cardinals, I don't care if you're a Cubs fan or not. And that is, in a lot of ways, consistent winning at a high level. You could not screw up more. You could not do worse. You could not do the opposite. Like when George Costanza, one of my favorite Seinfeld episodes, went to the chicken salad on rye. You untoasted. You could not do this more to the antithesis of what you're supposed to be about than just how beautiful of a disaster this Cardinals season has been at the start, and more specifically, this situation with Wilson Contreras has been. When you and Mark Feinstein made this point in 181 in our conversation, when you bring in Wilson Contreras, you know what you're bringing in. You know what you're bringing in because you have faced them a zillion times, especially the way the divisions used to be and in that rivalry. You know what you're bringing in because we know that John Mozeliak and that group have done their due diligence, as all organizations would, to know everything that you can about a player before you sign him to a 5-year, multi-million-dollar deal to replace a Hall of Fame stalwart like a Yadier Molina behind the plate. You know that you are getting an offensive catcher. You know that you are getting a guy who has caught big games and done so successfully, regardless of the people who want to say, well, it was David Ross here. Is this guy there? He'd been there. He'd done that and did it as a kid. You know that you've got somebody who's not going to win a Gold Glove as the best defensive catcher in the league, but you know you have a guy you can put back there and win with. He's had all sorts of relievers, all sorts of starters, lefties, righties, vendittis, as I like to say, and he's been just fine. But you're getting him because offensively at that position, he's a difference maker. You're not getting him as a DH. You're not getting him because year one, you think he catches, certainly forget about just for a few weeks, which he made it before they made the switch. You're not looking at it as a year he catches and then all of a sudden he's a designated hitter. You are doing it because of the differentiator that he becomes in what he can do behind the plate offensively for you versus what other teams can do, what he can do offensively for you versus what other players can do. And outside of trading for a Sean Murphy, who we didn't know offensively would have the impact that he's had, even for a defensive standpoint, because certainly a much better catcher than Wilson Contreras, there weren't that many catching options on the market, and you got a dude. It may have been the dude at that position available, but you know what you were getting. With that, you can't not only be surprised that he's not Yadier Molina, you can't be surprised he's not a great game caller, great pitch sequencer, that he's not great with pitchers. But that also doesn't mean we overrate how bad he might be. The problem here in this situation is not Wilson Contreras. The problem here is a lack of accountability from the pitching staff in St. Louis and a lack of accountability from the organization in St. Louis, from the management, all the way from the front office and president down to the manager. My problem with this, and yours, whether you're a Cardinal fan or just a baseball fan, should not be with Wilson Contreras and his catching. It should be literally with almost everyone else in this scenario. If when you started in spring training, let's start here, you had a full, now here's a guy who didn't represent his country in the World Baseball Classic and stayed around to learn your pitching staff. But at the same time, Adam Wainwright, Miles Michaelis, not there, part of the WBC. So with those two specifically, and maybe some others, not working with those pitchers. But he was there. He was there learning your system, learning how you like to approach things, learning your analytics, all the things that you didn't have conversations with before in free agency. He was there front and center learning from the day he reported until you began the season. You also got to learn about him. You got to learn about how he works with your pitchers through communication, conversation, and coaching, and watching, and seeing, and listening. You got to then watch him in games, albeit in spring training. You got to watch him between starts, in pen sessions, and you got to then navigate around the knowledge you were getting beyond what you already had in all that due diligence to go sign this player. You got to do all of that already. Regardless of the shortened time, WBC or not, with Adam Wainwright, Miles Michaelis, you already had all of that. Follow me. So here we are at the beginning of the season. For you to make it only a few weeks before you decide to drastically put out there and allow out there that you are taking him out of the catcher spot and that for the foreseeable future, whatever the hell that means, the guy you just signed for 5 years to be a catcher is then going to be your designated hitter is absolutely asinine. Number one, it could have been handled if there was a problem, which we'll get into, and clearly there was. If there was a problem, you could have handled it quietly. Well, how do you do that? The Cardinal way would do that. Now, Wilson Contreras wasn't expected to come in and teach the Cardinal way. Wasn't he supposed to learn it? Because in the Cardinal way, or the professional way, right, more likely, no matter what organization it is, you could have had him DH a couple of times a week. You could have had meetings behind the scenes with the specific pitchers. You could have aired out all the issues that were going on with the staff. not seemingly behind his back. You didn't have to drastically tell the entire baseball universe and breathing world that you made a mistake and this guy can't catch for you, which is what you did publicly to this dude and to your franchise that was already stinking up the joint, to your guys on the mound who were already stinking up the joint, who now have pointed and told you that the reason that they are not pitching as well. Now we know, let's be fair, Yadier Molina had an impact on pitchers his whole career. Yadier Molina, I remember doing an interview going back, I don't know, this is a million years ago with Anthony Reyes, was that 2006, where here's a rookie who pitches game one of a World Series. And I remember specifically, and this is verbatim truth, I'm at MLB.com, I'm doing the interview on the field after the game. And I asked him, how were you able to be so poised in game one? And he said to me, you could find this probably in 350K somewhere at MLB.com if you look it up. This was after game one of that World Series. And he says, Yadi's mitt, Yadi's mitt, Yadi's mitt. I remember he kept answering, he kept saying, Yadi's mitt. Point being, Yadier Molina is leading the dance, and he is just following and trying to hit that target. And that comfort, that trust level, big word we're going to get back to, that rapport, big word we're going to get back to, that camaraderie, big word we're going to get back to, between the battery of a pitcher and a catcher, that enabled him to do what he needed to do in game one of that series. No one is discounting that Yadier Molina is not only better than Wilson Contreras at that, Yadier Molina is better than anyone currently catching in this sport at that. Yadier Molina is in a handful, literally, of humans to ever do that specifically. This is a guy who used to stand up. He'd be able to point and look at you. And Sal Perez has had some of this his whole career. And I know Yadi's a guy that he has emulated. But you can literally, because I remember him doing it when I was covering the World Series with the late Ace Ventura was on the mound in a game 6 as a rookie. And you can do that whole kind of I got my eye on you thing like Robert De Niro, right? Where you basically don't even need to have a mound visitor say anything because there's such a control of trust and understanding of just that you've got the guy behind the plate. He knows what he's doing. It's a quarterback when Tom Brady goes in a huddle when Yadier Molina is crouching behind the plate. No one is expecting, and if the Cardinals were, they're idiots. No one was expecting Wilson Contreras to do that because no one else, for the most part, can do that. But to say that the ERAs are what they are because of this catcher, to have everybody stage some sort of a Cardinal way coup to get this guy to the DH spot, to then let it out there publicly so everyone knows, and most importantly, which we'll get into, Wilson Contreras and his psyche knows, was as much of a not Cardinal way, disastrous way to handle this as an organization could basically ever fumble a bag. What a joke. Garbage. Hot, utter garbage. Literally. I mean, it is like trying to say somebody else is at fault for a mistake you made. And that you is the pitcher. That you is the organization who chose this guy to be the catcher. That you is everybody except Wilson Contreras himself. Who, by the way, I have no doubt was having issues working with the pitchers, or that there's when there's smoke, there's fire, right? Some substance in some of this to whatever was going on, but this is not how you handle it. This is how other ways, not the Cardinal way, do it. Because here's the worst part of this. And now we got Wilson Contreras back behind the plate, and now we had Flaherty at a good start, and now we're going to try and figure this all out, right? The Cardinal pitching staff come in closer. It's not that good. All right? It's just not that good. That's going to be a problem. It's going to be a big problem. They're not that good. So regardless of what Wilson Contreras does, you can't put up great numbers. Here's the second part. And I said this in the conversation with Mark Feinstein. And I love Waino. No disrespect to him. So I almost take him out of this equation. I like Miles Michaelis, nice guy, good pitcher. We know what Jordan Montgomery's done. Steve Matt's been around. But hey, this isn't, Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz, and Javi Lopez or whoever, and saying that we can't throw to this guy. All right? clearly the pitchers are not that great. So who the hell are they to sit there and be like, well, if we're not pitching well, it must be his fault. The problem that you get here, and I'm going to bring other sports in, and something that's very different, but I'll explain where the parallel is. The pool party with Golden State, if you're an NBA fan, and what happened to Jordan Poole this year. Now, look, at the money he's making, I'm not excusing him at one point, a half into his last game in the playoffs, having 4 fouls and no points. So please understand that. But I am going to say that it is clear, and nobody needs to tell me from inside that situation, that Jordan Poole never really got back to fully being Jordan Poole after what happened with Draymond Green. That is clear. Okay? There was a trust issue, camaraderie, probably sides that were taken behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff. Now, here is a scenario where if you're Wilson Contreras, now what you're asking him to do is way harder. Because that was not all the Warriors gang together and say that Jordan Poole can't play. We don't want him on the floor. And that's what you just did to Wilson Contreras. The guys who he has to gain trust from and the ones he has to trust as well, when he puts those fingers down, when he is on, the bench in the dugout between innings, going through sequences, when he's between starts, when he's on the plane by himself playing on his phone and wondering if those pitchers are talking bad about him. He knows how much they crapped and delivered that hot lava all over him, and must have done so to such an extreme amount behind the scenes to each other, to coaches and to management, that this guy was relegated from a 5-year deal as a catcher, maybe best on the board as a free agent, to being a DH, that now his job is to tail between his legs, learn differently, figure out a way to be better, when he knows that every single guy he's throwing to does not like him. Every single guy he's throwing to thinks he's crappy at his job. Every single guy he's throwing to wants the other dude back there behind the plate instead of him. You go and put yourself. We never want to, with athletes, take this idea that they're people, right? Like a guy in the outfield could be going through a divorce or some kind of issue and he goes 2 for 30 and we're sitting there with crapping on the guy. And even if it comes out as, well, you know what? Sucks for you. That's your job. You're making millions and I pay for parking and yada, yada, right? And all that kind of garbage. We never want to take the athlete side. We never want to be that way. But I'm asking you to just try and think, regardless of the money the dude makes, I want you to try and imagine walking into a work environment where you don't think, but you know for a fact that everyone else at your job thinks you are incompetent at your job. And then I want to ask you to tail between your legs, work harder, learn better, and now create, and it's your job to create trust with people who have basically alienated you and tried to say you can't do this in this sport for this team. Because imagine the kind of veracity in which they were discussing Wilson Contreras, that this organization would take a guy they paid all that money for 5 years to catch and then move him to DH. Imagine how bad and how many guys and what kind of a momentum that conversation must have carried to the negative, and then sit there and say, why are we losing all these games? Because guess what? The culture of the Cardinals right now is garbage. It's not the Cardinal way. And this is not on, because look, baseball teams, a lot of players, not on Adam Wainwright, not on Nolan Arenado, not on Paul Goldschmidt, and I'm sure there's others, but those are 3 clearly I'm not blaming here. And the 3 of them weren't even there during when some of this was being built, quote unquote, right? Or breaking down right off you jump with Contreras when he got to the team in spring training. But these things don't happen in a Cardinal way, or more importantly, in the way of any professional team that wins anything. It's like a year ago when the Reds, when Castellini came out and he was on that radio station and he said, I don't care if the fans don't come, they don't need to, what else are they going to do here? Like, and all that garbage. And the team was like 3-19. And I remember sitting there, you can go back to one of the first episodes of the show, sitting there saying, if you ever want to know, yeah, okay, they don't have a lot of talent. Yeah, we get that. But why they can't, get the most out of that, squeezing out of that orange, whatever they had, or the red in this case, right? Well, go ahead and look at what the culture is. You got the players in that room and the owners sitting there basically saying, we don't give a crap. We're not even trying to win. And you know what? Sucks for you if you don't like it. Don't show up at the park. Well, I can't wait. Let's play 2. Going back to George Costanza. That's not how it works. So when the Cardinals aren't playing well and the Cardinals are losing, and then this is what's going on in the background, you can't be successful when that in an office, in a family, or anywhere is going on in the background. I've said this for I don't even know how many years to I don't even know how many people, way more than listen to me certainly hear or watch me now, or even do when I was on radio and television, because it's a life thing. This is not a sports thing. If you cannot look at something and find a way to rise above and be looking at how to get above or through, not around it, regardless of what the obstacle is, that stuff is going to fester. And then all of a sudden, everything else gets looked out of whack. Your problems may not even be that bad in your family, your office, wherever you are, but you can have negativity and it gets compounded. And then everybody sits there and is looking at a picture that's not even there. And that's what happens in a clubhouse when these guys are confined and with each other 24/7. And this dude is sitting there and having this go on. You go ahead and do it if you're him. Now, look, getting paid a lot of money. He's going to figure it out because he doesn't have a choice. He wants to play well. And there's an onus on him, I'm sure, and part of this too. I'm not saying there's not, but most of it, there is not. Most of it is on the organization. Most of it's on the pitchers who need to look in the mirror and start blaming themselves for not being able to have a pitch. You know how many bad catchers have had pitchers with good ERAs? Are you kidding me? Stop. That is, to me, utter hot garbage. This situation is not over. Wilson Contreras is not going to now have an ERA sub-3 the rest of the time with pitchers who can't do that as a staff. But what we're going to find out is there going to be accountability by anybody else at all, not through writers and articles and leaking garbage? Is there going to be any accountability behind the scenes when we don't know, where these guys as a group, because I think they need to go up to him and say, I'm sorry? Because you know what? You weren't doing the job to the way we need it, but we should have talked to you. You weren't doing the job the way we need it, but we weren't doing the job the way you need it. We weren't hitting the targets you put down. Regardless of what sequence, if I say I want to throw a fastball and you say throw a curveball, should I hang the curveball? We weren't doing the job. As the manager, we weren't doing the job. As the management, we didn't do our job to prepare you the right way, to make sure to integrate you the right way. If there is not accountability behind the scenes, this is going to fester for the rest of the season and the rest of his contract. This is not over with Wilson Contreras. But the Cardinals season may be, if they don't get their Cardinal way, headed the right way. Because right now, not so much. Unfiltered, as always, presented by our good friends at BetOnline.